As much as I would like to just continue on the path of tackling tough topics as I've done thus far, or attempted to do rather, discussing issues is not as effective if I don't slow down and take some time to go over some solutions that I may have found or things that have worked for me. And of what I consider solutions, I truly believe that of all of the things that I've found to help me, gratitude is above all else truly an effective means by which to solve the issues that I have and will talk about genuinely. Now, gratitude to me, I define it as something, it isn't as static or as binary as people often consider it to be, as far as I understand it. My personal philosophy of gratitude breaks it up into 5 characteristics or 5 central pieces. We'll call them pillars. And I'll describe each one of those, at least how I understand them and why they are an important part of the overall idea of gratitude. I think gratitude helps us to realize what we do have. When all hope seems lost, it can be very important to our livelihood to take a moment and ground ourselves in the cornerstone of our being. Whether it be things that are consistently good or things that are unchanging, whatever it may be that helps us to combat anxiety or deter bad thoughts or whatever else, being grateful for what we do have and things that are consistently good in our lives can solve so many of our issues if we are just able to become fluent in that. And so I'd like to start with the first pillar of gratitude, which I characterize as relief. Now, relief is kind of over here in its own sort of group. The next 4 that I mention will be more related to one another. But I mention relief first because it's kind of the tip of the iceberg or the roof of the tower of gratitude that we're going to build in this video. So, relief can be characterized by a sense, a feeling of just overcome with a lack or the overriding of anxiety. Now, the science of relief, and of course my intention is never to overwhelm you with data or statistics or research, but I do believe there's a time and a place for it, and I will say that the science behind relief is mainly a release of endorphins, and the neural pathway that is responsible for relief is the same one that is responsible for anxiety. And so when we experience anxiety, we're able to overwrite that experience or that feeling by enforcing, or rather coercing our body into feeling relief. And I think that may be one of the reasons, not the only reason of course, but one of the reasons we see this recent increase in trends, such as, I'm sure you're familiar with cold plunging or taking cold showers. Those have become a lot more popular lately. Especially in the last few decades, there's been an increase in HIIT exercises, or high intensity interval training. Also things, just difficult short-term stressors is the way I like to characterize them. And in a previous video, I talked about a short-term stressor that I like to partake in, which was very long walks or hikes in which I am gone for so long and walk so far that I use all my energy going one way. And by the time that it's come time to turn around and go back, I'm having to muster extra strength I may not have even known that I had in order to get back. And once I do finally get back, and I've done a hard thing, and I've had that short-term stress, I have this overwhelming sense of relief. I'm grateful to be back and no longer have to be walking without energy. I'm glad to be in a warm place, especially if I had been walking in the cold. And I'm glad to just be and have a roof over my head. And so I think that's one of the reasons, like I said, people do these short-term stressors. And as humans, this short-term stress is incredibly important for us. It's the long-term stressors like anxiety or, prolonged stress or fear or whatever it may be. If you're anticipating things constantly or overthinking things, or long-term stress is what's detrimental to our health. So that characterizes relief. And relief is just the tip of our gratitude. The next pillar of gratitude is admiration. Now, to better characterize or to better explain what I'm going to talk about, and with the next pillars to come, I want to first illustrate a spectrum, really. One end of the spectrum being admiration, and one end of the spectrum being humility, which is going to be our third pillar. Now, admiration, I characterize or define for myself as being the ability to recognize and appreciate others' strengths. And we can use admiration to strengthen our gratitude by being encouraged or being inspired by other strengths to strengthen our weaknesses. Now, admiration of others helps us to recognize and strengthen our weaknesses. When we admire someone, we recognize that we're different from them, but that they are successful, and we celebrate that success alongside them. And when the time comes for our own successes, we may very well have them celebrating alongside us too. And so it's important to admire, but not to envy. And I would like to introduce a second spectrum to illustrate the fine line that you walk between admiration and envy, as well as humility and vanity. So first we have this first spectrum that I've introduced of admiration on one end and humility on another end. And I'll introduce our inverse spectrum of envy, which will be the inverse of admiration, and vanity, which will be the inverse of humility. Of course, I'll go into all of this because some of these words' definitions may be, not exactly as they seem, but to me, this is all helping to build this foundation for our tower of gratitude. And as we work our way down, it should make more sense. So, humility is important. With admiration, we are using the strengths of others, admiring them, and helping to encourage ourselves to build up our weaknesses. With humility, we are doing the inverse of that, or the opposite of that. We recognize that others have weaknesses, and it can be easy to overlook those when we are only admiring others. So these two play into one another very importantly. And they complement one another. Because when we recognize others' weaknesses, it helps us to appreciate our strengths and be grateful for what we do have in ourselves. It also helps us to learn to encourage others, and they very well may have something to admire about us. That will lead us into our fourth pillar, which is generosity. Now, many times when we're admiring someone, they may not have any means of being generous. They may not directly be giving us anything. And we may be learning through them just by observing and applying to our life what we learned through observing them passively. Now, what we can do is when we use humility to recognize what we take for granted and what others don't have, and our strengths, which are theirs, sometimes their weaknesses, we can utilize generosity and humility together after recognizing the weaknesses of others to help strengthen their weaknesses with the strengths that we have. Now, many people, and I especially, have a lot of work to do as far as recognizing those who are in need and can use some help. And I'm sure that I know I have experienced so many times when I've needed something and I haven't had the strength to be open or to ask for help. And even if it was just wanting to converse about something or discuss something that I had been thinking about, just to have an ear. I think that it's so very important to develop and hone those skills to be able to differentiate between a person that needs help and a person that doesn't. And a lot of the time people do, because I know I do very often. And it can be very difficult to ask for help. And I admire people that have the ability to recognize when others need help. Now, as far as this gratitude tower works, there has to be a foundation. And of course, I saved the foundation for last because I consider it the primary cornerstone in this gratitude idea that we are building. And the fifth pillar is respect. Now, respect can be applied to anyone. You don't have to have someone you're admiring. You don't have to have someone who you empathize with. You should respect, firstly, all people. for the reason that, like you, they're on a journey of their own, and it will very likely intersect with yours eventually, if not more than once. And to respect the natural balance of the world, of life, of nature, whatever it may be, it's important to understand just how, I say insignificant for lack of a better word, but we all have an equal amount of potential, and that amount is limitless. From the people who are already successful to the people who feel lost or are struggling, neither one of their potentials is capped, and either one of them can end up at any place in their life. All people are invaluable. They have unlimited value, unlimited possibility, and it's impossible to know just where they will end up. So value them. And value yourself, because just as you would respect others and other things and the world, you need to respect yourself. Because if you don't respect yourself, you'll never properly understand how to respect others. So gratitude is important. It helps us to appreciate what we do have, and it can be very hard. And so, although we shouldn't, and although it feels wrong, we will compare ourselves to others. And as much as we may not want to, and we shouldn't, like I said, it's going to happen. So we should do it appropriately. We should admire those who are more successful than we think we are. And we should empathize with those who we feel are struggling. Because we've probably been there ourselves. And even if we aren't experiencing the exact thing that they are, we very well have experienced something similar.